that's a lot of my act is being a dad, because that's something that I'm sure we'll be talking about next. Is that for me was something I didn't. My dad wasn't around growing up, so like I was always very hesitant. Like when I found out to be a dad, I was like, all right, I got to do this right, and I don't have a stencil to look at. I didn't have a model. I have a joke where I talk about how my TV was stuck on channel 6, so all we watched was the Cosby Show, and even my fictional dad was a disappointment. Like so like just this concept of like I didn't know if I was doing it right. So a lot of my act is like, guys, I have no idea if I'm doing this right. Here's what happened. This is what I did. What do you think?
Right, right.
Um, because I'm really playing on that truth, that truism of mine, which is like I'm kind of looking at my family tree and being like, my family tree wasn't like a lot of other people's family tree. And you and I know a little bit about this, but I was raised by two women essentially in the 80s and 90s, Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is a little bit like living in witness protection. You just tell everybody you're living with the Golden Girls and you hope that they don't ask questions. Um,
Yeah,
and that was a big part of my identity growing up. Was I didn't know. I felt like I was always lying to people. Like I felt like I was always lying about my mom and her friend, or my. There's no other word. There was no Modern Family. You know what I mean? Like
right, right. Yeah,
there
because it
was
was
nothing like that.
in the 80s and 90s, just so people know. So you had two moms essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And at what time in your life did you realize that it wasn't a nuclear family, that you was
Yeah,
it was
right.
like
I was
when?
thinking about that the other day because I started writing sort of like all of my, like almost like a life story, just to kind of like flush all of that out. Because like my parents, like my biological parents, were a man and a woman who shacked up after college and tried to play house, and both really wanted to have a family and do the American dream and 2.5 dogs and all that stuff. And they both just in their hearts that wasn't what they wanted, and I think they were both seeking their family's approval and what they knew they were supposed to want out of life, and then they both said, you know what, this isn't working for me. And my mom did that earlier. She parachuted out pretty early by the time I was 2, and they had divorced, and so I don't have any memories of my biological parents together. But my mom had met a woman who was a nurse from Australia who had been landed in Scranton, Pennsylvania, as a psychiatric nurse in the hospital there, and they met at a conference, and that was my parent. Those were my parents. When I refer to my parents, because I always use the word parents, because then I'm like, when I say mom, I feel like I have to say moms, and if I have to say moms, then I have to have a dissertation and like lay out, you know what I mean? Like those are the little
Right, yeah,
moments that
yeah.
it's like, and so that's what life was like for me as a kid, trying to figure out how much do I tell you? What do I tell you? But is it going to stop the real conversation we're trying to have? Like, and then my dad, at that point kind of moved out of life because he had to figure, he tried to get remarried, he remarried another woman, did the whole Chick-fil-A drive-through service, like just tried to, fold an ID defense. And so he kind of was out for a while there.
Right, right.
And then fortunately now we have a good relationship. My dad, he's married in Spain, married to the same guy for 20 years. And they're both great grandparents to my granddaughters now. So that's great. And so something funny between that is like I make sure that they each have a word for my daughters, have a word for both of them, because that was something that always bothered me. Is I had no word for Colleen, who was my mom's wife or partner. You weren't allowed to have a wife back then, but that was who she had spent life with, and so I didn't have a word for her, and it kind of made me think of, that's what like Kamala Harris's husband must have felt like when he walked in there, like, oh, what do we call this guy, like, you
What
know.
do you call her? Did you ever come up with what
So
did?
it's just like, it's so certain times when I say mom, I just might not be referring. I might be referring to one versus the other. So the reality was, no, I just called her Colleen, or I said she was my aunt, or she was my mom's friend, depending on
How
how.
did,
Yeah,
when they were raising you, because I find this fascinating, especially in today's world, where a lot of this is now way more acceptable. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? This is
it's
almost
crazy.
mainstream now.
Do
Yeah.
you know
So,
how pissed I am about that? No, like, I'm not really, but like, just like what, like, everybody, you have to go through that. So thankfully, there must have been enough kids out there like me or whatever that we finally got to a place where we see that, and that's what I want my comedy to be about too. Is sort of the normalizing what should have been normalized when I was growing up,
right.
and not this. So it's crazy, because when I started teaching, I started noticing that they had a club that they called the Gay Straight Alliance. I actually heard about it in college. and that's when I was like, oh my goodness, there's a club for this. Like I just spent my
People
whole
like
life
you
like,
that were raised with gay parents.
or at least for an avenue to talk about how, that it was a thing, and that you could be allies, and even if you weren't, like, they were just being talked about, just the fact that and that
Right.
was part of what the club was, to just to not make it the stigma, to not make it this thing, and to educate, and to give a place where those kids who felt that way. Now for me, I wasn't gay. That's part of my, like, oh, I was the only one who turned out not gay. My dad's gay, my mom's gay, my mom's brother's gay. I'm the only one, like, somehow, so
So you
that that it must have skipped a generation. I don't know. But like, and so then you're like, oh, nature versus nurture. Well, hey, I don't know what to tell you on this one.
right. Did you have to come out of the closet
Yeah,
and
right.
when you were
That's what that
straight?
was. That's a bit I'm actually currently working on, where I had to come out straight, and I broke it to my mom's in a Home Depot, and so then they helped me build a closet for me and my friend who happens to be a girl. Um, so it's just like, how do I play with that? How do I take those things that for me were traumatic? I mean, it was like I don't know, so it's like, scared at any point, but like, you had a lot I didn't want people to judge me because of that. My mom didn't want that. That was her biggest fear, was that people were going to treat me differently because of her decisions. And that
That's
was the
what, yeah.
thing.
That's what
That
I
was
wanted
the
to
thing.
ask you. Yeah, because I wanted to see when you were growing up in the 80s and 90s when it wasn't as accepted as it is today, were your parents not, like what advice did they give you when you would go to school, when you bring friends over, or any of that kind of stuff? Did they, like, how was that vibe? And was it a secret, or like how did you
Yeah,
handle it?
it was sort of like this, it's just not something we're going to talk about. Or if we do, then they're friends, which isn't a lie. They were friends. They didn't need to know their intimacy levels. I didn't know that about my friends' parents. Why did they have to know that? But there's this
True.
constant need and when you meet someone in the LGBTQ community, or IA plus, you have to sort of now, all of a sudden, because we don't know a lot about it, there become all of these probing questions people want to know that you would never ask a straight person, but because
Right.
it's new. So it's like, I can understand that from just being curious by nature. But so just, I didn't want to have to, like I said, every time I got into a conversation with someone in the store, I was there to talk to them about the game or whatever. I didn't want it to get sidetracked. So then you just learn to say, okay, that's not the point of this conversation. So what do I just give them so that their brain can comprehend that part? Because I had two adults who loved me, cared me, make sure I got to practice on time, fed me, and did my laundry. Yeah, that's so. In that instance, you just talk about, my mom and her sister, who happen to have an Australian accent, and they look nothing alike. Um, but the story, we sort of had a backstory, or at least I had created one at some point. I don't know that we sat down in a situation room and had like a family meeting, but like the things I would say was, that's my mom's aunt, but through marriage, and that my uncle, my mom's brother, had died because her husband had passed. She was married originally. My other mother was also married originally. She actually had 5 kids. She was married to a military spouse. They had moved all over the world, and because she was like maybe 10 to 12 years older than my mom, her kids were like adults and grown by the time they had started their relationship. So I actually had this other kind of like siblings, almost like step siblings in a
Yeah.
way. And that was a whole different dynamic. Some of them had accepted me, and I had one that I kind of looked up to, like a brother who lived with us for a period of time because he was in the military. So when he wasn't out, he would stay in the guest room. But even the dynamics of the house, like when I had friends sleep over, like when I got to the age that kids started sleeping over, they would actually they would use the guest room as one of their bedrooms. So they would pretend that they had 2 bedrooms, that they weren't staying in
Wow.
one bedroom. So like my mom would legit do that. She wouldn't even just say that. Like she would do that. Like she kept up those appearances, which, in retrospect, think about now, is like, wow, that's like, it's like, whatever, she's sleeping in that bed tonight, whatever. But there, it's just, you had to do that, like you had
It
like,
actually gives me the goosebumps, like, because she did that, for you, I guess, and it was the time that it was, and makes you
yeah.
realize how fortunate we are now that we've gotten through it because of people like your mom, and who, kind of paved the way for where we are today with this.
It's yeah, it's incredible what you got. But like you said, you do what you got to do, because that's not the point. We just want to have a normal life. So she got, put me in a bunch of activities, and they had great circle of friend groups that, there was this like group of gay guys, probably about three different couples, six different guys in the next town over. And it was just typical. Like one was the town florist, one owned the dinner theater, and great guys, lavish. I was like, it was like watching Nathan Lane and Robin Williams and the Birdcage. Like the house looked like that. And so we spent a lot of time there for like, holidays and stuff like that. So that was sort of our family when like, some of their families weren't accepting of their lifestyle, or were to a degree, but not in there. So when we wanted to be comfortable and not feel awkward, then we all kind of, had this other family that was not blood family. So that's another thing that's kind of cool for me is I have a lot of family that have people I consider family. So that didn't have to be blood. So that taught me that, blood's great. I understand that, but that's not what defines the people you have in your life and the relationships you have with them. So, family and tradition is great, but you can have family and tradition and not have blood. Like those things don't, in the same way you can have a relationship and a marriage and not have it be a guy and a girl.
Right.
So it's, I can understand that now, like things like that make sense to me, but man, did I wish it was easier growing up? Do I wish I could have just, would it have been nice? But I'll tell you what, it would have been a lot blander of a life than the one I got to live. And I can't duplicate what I went through and those experiences. And a lot of it was fun stuff. Most of it was fun. I had great memories because my mom worked so hard to make sure that things were as normal. But I think for her, she tried to live like, even though she had this lifestyle and she was embracing it to a degree, she was still trying to put the stencil of that Norman Rockwell painting on. Like she held on to weird traditions and things like that she knew my mom would have wanted, and she always, or my grandma would have wanted. Right. So, you could see the burden that that probably took on her to kind of try to find a way. So she was a pioneer in some senses like that. So kudos to her and Colleen for how like that they decided that they found happiness and they wanted that and they tried to pursue that as best as then. Same to my dad. It took my dad a little bit longer. I always joke that when AOL came out, so did he. Like that was sort of the rocket point of when he started exploring, and it was all of a sudden probably had an avenue. You can't just go down the street or the bar. And I think when those things came about, it gave a way for people to express themselves in a variety of ways. And he's got a healthy and happy relationship. And like I said, him and Luis are great grandparents. We went and spent about a month with them in Spain in the summer.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
My wife took both girls. We've even had them stay over in the same house with my mom. My non-biological mother, Colleen, she's passed away since.
Oh, God bless.
My mom lived. My biological mom, Mary Ellen, lives with us. So there was a time there where Luis and Mark, my dad and his husband, came and stayed with us for like 6 weeks. I thought it was a weekend. I thought I had committed to a weekend. And they're like, it was like when Coming to America, and they're bringing the trunks, like they're like carrying stuff in. And I'm like, what is happening? And I didn't know because they hadn't been in the house together. Like, and they were always cordial and they didn't have like a bet. But like, it was funny because it took a little like back and forth of like negotiating like all the household and stuff like that. But in the end, it was beautiful because like Luis is a crazy good cleaner. Like he like tears the house apart like on a daily basis and cleans. My dad's a great cook. Like my mom had the pattern with the girls and all of that. So like when they were like and things were getting fixed, I wanted a cat door. Like Luis has like then Luis stopped cleaning and he's now got like a horse and a saw. Wow. And he's sawing the door and he's like so handy. And then he's out in the garden planting irises. Like wow. What is happening? Like and so it just became this beautiful moment. And I'm like 36 years old at this point. And now my family all figured out who they were. We don't have to be apologetic anymore. And now here we are all in this household together. And I had the weirdest moment because one night I was sitting in the living room and I looked over to my right and I looked to my left and I'm like, oh my God, I am in a living room and like prime time on like a weekday. And there's my mom and there's my dad for the first time in my life. Wow. And what's on the TV? This Is Us on NBC. And I'm like, this is like so poetic right now. Like
that's great.
But like, so it's sort of interesting how all of that has come together. Like, and I'm so proud of them for not fighting and pushing down and going against that grain, because I know a lot of people must do that. There must be tons of people that, hide in that closet. There's the reason we call it hiding, staying in the closet. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's so easy. I think there's still people today that feel like they have to do that regardless. And I'm proud of them for going against that and staying true to themselves, because that's what, now I get to go on stage and I get to be myself, and I get to, and so that to me is really important, because I felt like I've lied most of my life to myself and everybody around me about the simplest of things. I don't want to lie anymore. So now it's like, all right, let's put that truth out there. Let's do that, and let's build that tension and then find ways to break it, because it's ridiculous that it had to be like that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
and but the story is powerful, and I know you're a writer. I don't know if you plan on writing this out into a book or something, or if you're using it for your material in your stand up. But it's definitely kind of a powerful story, especially for these times of they have both parents are homosexuals with their
yeah,
spouses, and but it all works, and they did a great job raising you,
yeah,
and you're a testament to that, to anyone who
yep,
doubts that it could work or whatever, the haters out there or whatever. You're a
yeah.
testament to that. It's a positive thing, and it works, and it's a good thing, and it's normal.